little bit of maybe where he's coming from. Because what we just heard is a reminder of how powerful our words are. And it's interesting that we just finished getting over this big fear about Hurricane Erica and how much rain we were going to get and how much wind and how it was going to damage things. But what the book of James told us is there is nothing more powerful than our tongue. There is nothing more powerful than our words, because our words are able to hurt. However, if our words are able to hurt, that also means our words are able to help, to heal, so they can do the opposite. As Jean was reading, I was thinking about a few different things. And one of the things I was thinking about is the importance of community. And I like to be able to share a memory with you, one of my favorite memories of growing up. When I was a child on Long Island, going to the South Shore, going to Smiths Point Beach was one of the biggest events that we had. And there would always be one day during the summer where we would spend one whole day by the ocean. We would pack up the car with our blankets and our towels. We'd pack up the car with so much food, you can never imagine how much food could possibly be eaten by a family of 6. We would also pack up the car with my father's transistor radio. Remember the kind that ran on the batteries before there were iPads or people listened to their headphones? And we would go to Smiths Point for the day, and we would get to the beach. And in order to go from the parking lot to the ocean, you had to walk underneath this tunnel. And if you've ever been a child, and if you've ever walked underneath a tunnel, what is it that you do? You shuffle your feet, and you go, choo-choo, and you let your voice echo throughout the place. And we would get to the shore, and right in front of us would be where the families and the older community was. My family always went to the left to where the teenagers and the younger people would be. And this would be during a time where people would have their radios playing and you could walk past our blankets and listen to a variety of different kinds of music, and we would put our blankets out. We'd go swimming in the ocean, we'd get nice and sandy and playing in the surf. And then there'd be that time where my mother would open up the snacks. And there would be the store-brand cheese puffs and the store-brand Doritos and potato chips and the dip that you would make at home with the onion mix. And then there'd be the iced tea and the lemonade. And after hours of playing in the ocean, we would eventually go to the barbecue area, where my mother would proceed to lay out a banquet on the picnic table. She would take back out those chips and the pretzels and the cheese puffs and the dip. She would also put out a tray of the fresh vegetables, and there were always black olives there. My father would start the grill, and there would be sweet Italian sausage and roasted grilled onions and peppers, you know, the red and the orange and the yellow and the green, and the Italian bread that was like a baguette where you can slice it in half and slice it down the middle. And we would have grilled onions and pepper and sausage, and my mother would make her potato salad. And I don't know how other people make their potato salad, but my mother would always put at least 2 hard-boiled eggs in there, and Gulden's mustard, and lots of onions, and lots of peppers. And we would sit there and just have this incredible feast while my father was playing WRCN classic rock on his transistor radio. And we would have our iced tea and our lemonade and fly our kite, and then we would always end the night by having the Little Debbies. You know how you can get for like 99 cents, like a package of like 12 of those?
We're hungry now, Pastor.
We're hungry. I'm hungry. I share this because that memory, in many ways, is kind of like my Eden. That was my time in the garden with my family, with food, with nature. And I believe most of us, if we've been fortunate enough to have a blessed childhood, have that Eden moment in our life where everything seemed perfect. And I share that because during the course of this week, one of the theologies I've really come across is that notion of, at some point we all began in Eden. At some point we all began being surrounded by nature and people we loved and the goodness of God, where everything we needed was right before us, where we could literally walk with God in the coolness of the afternoon. But somehow, some way, something happened, and we lost that Eden experience. And I believe that the rest of the Bible, in some ways, is about a group of people who are trying to say, how can we go back? How can we go back to the ways things once were, where there was goodness and love and family and nature and food and music, and you didn't have to stress and you didn't have to worry? So when you read the Bible, you hear all these experiences of people who are no longer in Eden, who want so much to go back to living a life that's perhaps simpler, happier, nicer. James certainly talked about that, didn't he? James talked about our tongue. He talked about our mouth. He talked about the ways in which we speak. He made a mention about people who don't make mistakes or not perfect, are perfect. But as we know, because of the left shark phenomena, no one is perfect, and thank God for that. Amen. But because we're not perfect, we make mistakes, don't we? And sometimes the biggest mistakes we make are with our mouth, with the things that we say, the things that we let slip, the times in which we're subconsciously thinking something, and it comes across in the words that we choose. And for a lot of people who are part of the Facebook generation, we have really experienced how Facebook has forever changed the way we communicate, because it is so easy to so cowardly make comments and to criticize and to judge. I don't like the way you look in that photo, or I disagree with you, or you're completely wrong, or that whole thing of cyberbullying that's taking place in which teenagers are using Facebook to now say to a community of millions of people exactly what they think about someone. And they say sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's the biggest lie. Because words hurt, don't they? And we never forget the words that people say to us. I can still think back to my mom, who shared a story about when she was going through confirmation class in Brooklyn. She was supposed to recite the books of the New Testament, and she made a mistake. And the pastor there said, well, what can you expect? She's German. My mom was 8 years old. She's 69, and she has never forgotten that, and she carries that wound with her. And if we're going to be honest, I have probably wounded quite a few people here as well, with words that I have said either intentionally or unintentionally. And that's one of the realities that I have to deal with and struggle with. We also know the reality of how people have been hurt in churches. Think of how many people here did not start off as members of Emmanuel United Church of Christ. Think of how many people here have come from another church or another denomination or another background in which maybe you were told what to think, or you were told there's a group of people who are not welcome, or if you believe this way, you're wrong, or if you live this way, you're wrong, or if you don't do exactly as we do, there is something wrong with you. And we have a new member class going on today, and I always get to hear some of those stories of where people are coming from. So we know that wounds can hurt, words can hurt. We know that the Gospel of James reminds us how powerful our tongues are, how strong our words are. So where's the good news? Where's the good news in knowing that what we say, how we talk to one another, can really hurt them or have a negative effect? I believe part of that good news is for us to be mindful of who we are. We are Christians. We are followers of Jesus Christ, and we are members of Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And it's important for us to remember who Jesus was. If you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, what you will discover is how Jesus was very compassionate to those who were learning. Jesus was very compassionate to the lost, to the young, to the confused, to the lonely. He was able to speak words of healing and words of grace to them. However, to those who were the leaders, the religious leaders, the politicians, Jesus would speak harshly to them because he needed them to be mindful of who they were. But I think of the ways how when Jesus would talk to some of the people who surrounded them, he had the ability to call them children. He called them little ones. And this wasn't in a way to condescend. It wasn't in a way to look down upon and say, I'm greater than you. He was able to say it the way a parent or a grandparent or an aunt and uncle would be able to speak to a member of their family to let them know who they were. And by letting them know who they were, he was allowing them to know where they belonged. Little one, beloved, child. That kind of goes back to that memory at Smiths Point Beach of being there with family, with a banquet, with all that food and music, and being in nature. Little one, beloved, child, is that way in which Jesus reminds us of who we are, that we belong to God. We belong to the Almighty One who created this world and could have easily walked away, but stayed here and stayed connected and continued watching over us and interacting with us. And God continues to interact with us through one another, through the ministry that we do, the way that we talk, the way that we interact, the ways we are able to reach out and to care for one another. And perhaps James is a perfect book for us as we go into the fall season, because we start resuming a lot of our church work. We start welcoming people back. And perhaps it's good for us to be mindful that the things we say will have an impact. The things we say about one another, the things we say during fellowship time, or the things we may say in the kitchen, the things we may say during our meetings. It may also be a reminder of being graceful for one another. Because as James reminds us, we're not perfect. We are flawed. We do make mistakes, and we are always striving and trying to be better, and we are always trying to go back to that place in Eden where everything was just right. So as I begin to wrap up the message today, and I'm not sure if I've connected the dots or if the dots have been totally blown apart, maybe the purpose of today's reading is just that nudge for us to remember, how do we speak to one another? How do we speak to one another as church members? How do we speak to one another through social media? How do we speak to one another in community? And I just had a realization. What if it's, how do we speak to ourselves? And can we speak to ourselves the way that God and Jesus would speak to us? Maybe the blessing for today is that this week we each take time to call ourselves child, beloved, and little one. And by saying that, we are reminded that we are loved. And maybe by reminding ourselves that we are loved, we could be mindful that everyone else around us is loved too. I have gone as far as I could possibly go. For that, I believe we can all say, amen and amen. Let us go ahead and enter into a time of silent contemplation.